Hey everybody, Creative Katie, Karen Burchill here. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to give you some options and you will be asked this or that. Which of these projects do you like more? So pay attention and be sure to give me your answer in the comment section below. So if you love gnomes, you're going to love this collection of gnomes that just came from NINNYSNAPKINS.com. I'll put a link in the description box below. But we've got a baker gnome, we've got a honeybee gnome, a Valentine heart gnome, a fisherman gnome, a school gnome, and then this rabbit gnome. They all have names like people, Alice, Tommy, and stuff. But if you do a search for gnomes in the site, you will find them. Speaking of gnomes, I have a digital sentiment pack, Oh Gnome You Didn't, that you could use with this or other gnome projects that you might have. This is also available as a digital download at NINNYSNAPKINS.com. So let's put all of these away. You will definitely be seeing me create with them. I'm going to use this little guy today. He's kind of seasonal with the rabbit ears. His name is Pascal. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to release the focal image from the napkin. And I'm just going to cut this into 4 quadrants. We have 4 identical images in this napkin. And that's one of the reasons why I love using napkins, because you have so many focal images and you can do options. Now I'm going to do 2 different projects, mainly because I couldn't decide which one I wanted to do more. And when you do one, you often get ideas that you can learn as you go. So the process at the beginning, you peel off the excess layers, and I'm going to use my fine liner brush with a little bit of water and water cut around the focal image. Some of those carrots and things that are on the napkin, I don't want to use for this project. I'm just really interested in just the gnome, and I'm going to create a home or a page for him to be in. The deckled edge makes it, as opposed to cutting it with scissors, which you could totally do, just leave the plies on before you cut, so it's a little easier. The deckled edge disappears more in your project, so you don't get that line. So this one, it is a mixed media board, and I am using this to set up for in my home decor. I have an easel that this pops into, and I can swap it out with the seasons. And I wanted a springtime one. Now I'm using Crafter's Workshop modeling paste and this stencil called Knitted Stitching. And it kind of resembled the carrots or the tops of the carrots. So I kind of liked how it worked with the focal image, the bunny ears. And I'm putting this in 3 places, just a nice coat. Now, I'm not overly concerned about getting perfect stenciling with the modeling paste, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. You can cut off the excess that goes over the edge, or you can wait for it to dry and rub it off then. It'll work either way. So I'm just repositioning it, and I'm kind of putting the gnome where he goes. I don't really want some of that texture where the gnome is going to go. Now, you can scrape off modeling paste should you get some where you don't want it. You can, at this stage, while it's wet, scrape it off. You can also wait till it's dry to scrape it off. Now, I am drawing in between stages. So I'm using my fluid matte medium here, and I'm going to glue down my napkin gnome right now. And I'm doing it now because I don't want any color or pattern that I put in the background to come through the napkin. I don't want to distort the colors at all. So here there's a little bit of texture that would go underneath the gnome. So I'm just scraping it off before I glue the gnome down. I'm putting a little bit of the gel fluid medium underneath and then brushing it on top to seal that napkin because I know I'm going to be overpainting and I want it to be a non-porous surface. If you don't seal it with gel medium or something similar, it's going to take color differently. So now I want to colorize the background and I'm going for a neutral background here. I'm thinking I might add more color or pattern, but I want to start neutral and I'm using unbleached titanium. If you haven't used it, you might want it. I find I've used tubes and tubes of this and I'm mixing it with white gesso to get kind of that mottled, cloudy effect. Where the texture is, it's taking it a little bit differently. And you might be thinking, well, Karen, I can't see the texture. You will. We will bring that out later on. And you can choose how much you want to bring it out. So I'm just adding a little bit of white. If it's getting too mixed, too blended, stop, use your heat tool or let it dry, and then come in and lighten it up or darken it up if that's happening. So then I had the idea, I wanted to use some of that orange, play off the carrot. So I'm using it's Artist Loft orange paint. I'm using it on bubble wrap and I put it on here. And right about now, I'm thinking, I'm not really happy with this. I don't know if I just had too big of a space. It just wasn't put in the wrong place. I don't know. But I'm going, oh no, oh no, oh no. So I'm going to dry that and I'm trying to knock it back. I'm putting a little bit of the gesso, a little bit of the unbleached titanium. I'm thinking, okay, but maybe the orange is just too bright. Now I could have deleted this, but I wanted to show you that not every decision we make is the right one, or do we like? So here I'm just taking it and thinking, okay, well, let's try again. Maybe there was just too much of it. Try it again. Nope. The bubble wrap and the orange simply not working. So between off camera and on camera, I completely take it back to square one, which is just the unbleached titanium and the white gesso. There's always gesso and it solves all our problems. Here I'm just lightening this up a little bit and I got more orange on my makeup sponge. Some days it just goes from bad to worse. But take a deep breath, reboot. So then I grabbed this X Trail stencil. All these stencils are from Crafter's Workshop, and there's a link to Crafter's Workshop in the description box below. You can also get some Crafter's Workshop stencils at NINNYSNAPKINS. I mixed the white gesso with the orange to take away some of the brightness, and I'm liking it a little bit more. I'm also liking the X shape here. I think this is a better mark in my background than what I was getting with the bubble wrap. And that could be user error. I just want a little bit of interest in that background. I don't want it to overtake the focal image. But I'm trying to take some of those colors from the gnome, the focal image, and bring it into the background, which I believe always makes it cohesive. I grab a script stamp and I'm just using my archival ink and I'm just stamping a little bit of patterning. I'm not trying to read the script. I'm not trying to make it too precise. I just want to add, again, another layer of interest to my background. Right here, I grab that orange and I'm edging my project. Now this is mixed media board, so it's got a centimeter, maybe a little less than a centimeter thick. It's from the Crafter's Workshop, and I've cut it to size to fit my easel. I just cut it with an X-Acto knife. but I like the mixed media board. It takes text, it takes mediums really well and stands up. And it's a good substitute for canvas boards, but it doesn't have that canvas look or feel to it. It's just smooth like paper. So at this stage, I'm liking it, and I'm moving on to overpainting the focal image. And when I say overpainting, I'm putting a little bit of gesso and a wash of colors. And today I'm using my acrylic paints, just watered down. So I'm deepening some of the greens and the oranges of this with a washed watered down paint. And then I'm brightening some of the white areas by an application of the white gesso. And you'll get a close-up of this with the second project. Now, the things that I learned from doing this project, I apply on the next project. And that's one of the advantages of using a napkin where you've got two identical focal images. You can experiment and try things out and see which one works best. So here I'm just darkening the green, and I'm taking paint out of the tube on a wet brush, just adding a little bit of water and washing it. And I just want to deepen the colors because I want the focal image to stand out the most. And sometimes it just gets a little too faded. By adding the gesso and the paint, sometimes that adds texture and it looks more painted than decoupaged. And I like that look. Another favorite trick here when I'm applying paint is to tap with my finger like you see me doing there. It seems to soften the paint application a little bit. It doesn't look, you get rid of the paint, the brush strokes, I guess. I also do the overpainting with the gesso, and then if I don't like the color, or if I want to change the color a little bit to match something a little bit more. Now I'm doing this on the mixed media board, but basically this is very close to the size of a card. I could do this as a card, but I just did a video with 4 different Easter cards. So I just want to show that it doesn't matter what substrate you're working on, a card base, a mixed media board, a canvas board, or an art journal page. You can pretty much follow the same steps. What's going to change is how much other real estate there is, and that will determine how many other techniques you want to do. Are you going to add texture? Are you going to add one pattern or you're going to add multiple patterns? If you've got larger space, you can probably get away with doing more. Here I'm taking my, I think it's called a rigger brush. It has a very long, the brush part, I don't know what that's called. And I'm thinning white paint or white gesso and just painting the hairs. His beard, the fur on his hat. I just want to kind of extend that off the napkin onto my background a little bit. And again, you'll see more of this when I do the second project. I don't show the entirety of all the projects, especially if it's something that's repeated, but I do want you to get a close look of what I'm doing so that you're better able to do it in a project that you're doing at home. And you're definitely going to want to stay tuned and watch to the end to get that second project. Because between you and me, I think I like it better. Now I'm taking black and I'm edging around. Now there's a little bit of black. I'm also going to do some shading on my gnome. This just frames it. And I know I'm going to put some sentiment on here, and that's going to have black. And again, you want everything to work together. Now, the stage that it's at, I wish I had stopped here and put the sentiment on, but didn't. And so then we added a couple more steps. But I like where it is right now with the X Trail stencil with the orange there showing. I prefer this, but I only know that looking back. So, but if I was going to do it again, doing this as a card, which I'm going to because I've got two more gnomes from this napkin, I would do it like this. So often I'll do a project in my art journal and I'll use that as the jumping off point to either do it on a canvas, do it on a mixed media board for display, or for doing it on a card. That's where you play. So here's the part that I would leave out. Okay, I'm taking some of the green. I wanted to, the background looked dull to me. So I decided I want to rub some of that green, bring some of that green from the gnome into the background. But I put very little here and it didn't really brighten it, didn't really introduce the green. Let's just say I liked it less. But I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to splatter it with gold. Maybe that'll help. Bling always helps. And then I splattered it with black. And then I came in with my makeup sponge and I did the green a little bit stronger in the background. It brings out that texture. And I used the dark red there, which is I'll get the color. I use it later. It's either called red oxide. I cut out the sentiment "Somebody loves you." And there we have this finished project. So I'm going to take the things that I learned from this project and move it and do some things different with the next project. But some of the steps are the same. Now I have my gnome. It's all cut out. The napkin was prepared the exact same way. And this time I'm using this stencil. It's called Circles Nested, again from Crafter's Workshop. And I'm putting the modeling paste through this stencil. Now my art journal page is 7 by 10, so it's a bigger surface. So I've gone up on the scale of the patterning of this stencil. Where the knitted stitching was very fine, I went for bigger and bolder. And here again, I don't want this in some places, so I'm just taking my palette knife and scraping it off. I want it kind of flowy. I want this to go behind the gnome, kind of a swoop across the page. And since it's a 6 by 6 stencil, that's really hard to achieve in one goal. So I did try that one a little bit, just so I wouldn't make a mess. And then I'm doing the second half of the swoop. And I'm going to put him in the middle. Again, I'm avoiding putting any of that texture right behind where I'm going to glue my focal image. If you're not sure what focal image you're using, like here I started with my focal image and you end up and there's texture underneath where you glue it down. That's not a problem. You can totally glue it down. Just be careful that you're not ripping the napkin because the napkin, when you make it wet with the fluid matte medium, it does get very fragile. But don't let that prevent you from gluing a napkin on top of textured stuff. Then I want to add some more interest, and I have this leaf stamp, which looked to me like bunny ears, which now looks to me like eyeballs. So I can use it in a multitude of purposes. I'm just stamping with my archival ink because it's permanent when it's dry, and I just want some pattern in the background. I'm not planning for this to be that visible because I'm going to put color on top of this. And I looked up, I had this stamp. This is peace, love, joy. Not necessarily the sentiment I'm going with, but again, it's just going to be interest. Now, underneath the napkin with that stamping, that's going to come through. So I now have a problem to solve. But before I get there, I am going to stamp with my script stamp. Again, that just pushing other things back, and I'm going right on top of the modeling paste. These are all just details and little bits of interest that you're building into your background. It's all about the layers. So now I'm going to colorize, and again, I'm using the unbleached titanium and the white gesso, just like I did in the first project. And my goal here, I want to knock back some of that stamping. I don't want that to be so forward. That's why I stamped it before I put the color, because I knew that the color would knock it back. And then where the gnome is going, right in the middle there, I'm going to add even more gesso and really knock that back because I don't want any of that patterning to come through and be on the face of the gnome. That's just not a look that I want to have. So again, this gets completely dry, and then I'm going to position my gnome here, good old Pascal, and I'm putting a coat of fluid matte medium, and then just putting a coat on top. Being very gentle with the brush. You want a softer brush because you don't want to rip the napkin. If you do, just put a little dab of gesso on it and paint over it. Nobody's going to even know it's there. In fact, if you watch, I do rip right by his carrot there. I do end up ripping the napkin. I got a little rough right there. You can see I just made a hole. I just put a little bit of gesso there, and I put the unbleached titanium on top, which is the color of his beard, and away we go. Now, here's where I changed and I learned. I didn't like what happened with the other one, but I did like the texture coming out. So I grabbed yellow, which is on a color that's in his ears, the yellow-green. I put that on a makeup sponge, and I'm rubbing it over top of the modeling paste, the texture that I've put through that stencil, that nested, circles nested stencil. And I like that. I think maybe because it's the type of stencil that was used there, that it was larger scale, that it worked, but you get that swoop, it brightens the page, which was one of my problems with the first one. I thought it was just too dull. It was flat. This one, there's just so much interest in there. Just that little bit of text peeking through from the stamping. And now the texture, the pattern of this is just really shining through. So I'm very happy. Then I decide, I didn't want to use that orange. That was just too bright. I wasn't sure what to do, so I'm edging at this point. I'm going to take my black and frame my page. And this is something I often do. I do it on every page and project for sure, but I do it often when I don't know what my next step is. It gives me some think time. It frames everything, puts things into perspective. And it did the trick here. Remember, you're going to be asked which one, this or that, project number one or project number two. So here I grab my Artist Loft, and I believe they call this burnt sienna. It's red oxide, very similar to what's red oxide on the Liquitex Basics. So depending on whatever's cheapest at the time, that's what I'll buy. And I rub that on top, and OMG, I am loving that. It warms up the page, ties into the color of the carrots on the gnome, And I wish that I had discovered that sooner. It was at this point I actually went back to the project one and added the burnt sienna red oxide color to bring out that texture a little bit more. And I kind of sort of saved it, but anyways, when you're doing a project, you're experimenting, you're trying things out, and no matter what, you win because sometimes you win and sometimes you learn, and that's a win because then you can make different decisions moving forward. Again, this one, if I did this on on a card, or if I did it on my mixed media board like that, it would have less real estate. It would probably just be the gnome and what's on the left or just what's on the right, but I could totally do it. Here I'm just extending it a little bit more just to make the swoop a little bit more pleasing to my eye. And I'm just putting the stencil back on and just stenciling through it. There's no texture there, but your eye sees it as all part and parcel of it. So I'm just extending it to where I want. And I could be taking the yellow with that burnt sienna color as well. I have the burnt sienna on my palette and I water it down and I'm just giving a splatter, getting those plain areas. You can see a little bit of the stamping shining through, just enough. That's all I want it. And then I'm going to splatter with black, and that's going to tie in with the sentiment, the framing that I used, and the shading that I'm going to do on the gnome. Because you know how we colorized or overpainted the first gnome, we're going to do that with this one. And I'm just going to show some of that. If you look at both of these projects, my overpainting is not identical, but the process is. I'm just adding a little bit of gesso with a little bit of watered down paint just to heighten the colors and make it look, like I said, less decoupage, just glued down napkin, and more painted. It bolsters the colors, makes your focal image stand out a little bit more. Now it's competing. As much as I like that swoop with that stencil and texture paste with the burnt sienna and the yellow, I still want my focal image to be what really draws the eye. I'm using my liner brush and painting the carrot stalks, the greens of the carrot in there. Now I have the liner brush. Now this one, the hairs are relatively short. And then there's I think it's called a rigger brush that has the longer hairs. And I find that for when you're doing fur, um, it works really well. I think this gnome is just beyond adorable with the bunny ears, and I just knew I had to create with him sooner than later. I think the next one is going to be the chef one. I think he's going to go in my easel as well. I think he's absolutely adorable. So please do go to Ninny's Napkins and grab them because I'm sure these ones, the gnome ones, napkins are going to be very, very popular. So I'm using the liner brush right here to make the hairs and the fur. And it's going okay. You can make it work with the liner brush. But again, like I said, the rigger brush, it has longer hairs, and I just find that this process a little easier to make finer hairs. And I'm just taking those hairs and brushing it, melding the background with the focal image. There's that rigger brush, and it's almost twice the length. The hairs are almost twice the length of my liner brush. And I hold it relatively loosely and just kind of swoop with it. I'm sure that's the technical term. I would go in before you do this line work. Before this, you want to do any shading because the shading is underneath and the hairs will look more forward. Just little by little, adding more and less. I'm going to speed up the video here and I just keep working on the hairs till I get what I like. But you can see the hairs are going on top of the carrot and they're going into the background. I wanted to make a different thing. I found some sayings. I don't carrot all. Does carrot cake count as a vegetable? Take good care of yourself. And then I decided, I want to add a little more cream. So I grabbed these, um, they're coffee filters that I've colorized, and I grabbed a green one. I got a whole folder of them. I'll link the video where I show how to colorize them to build your stash. I ripped them and I'm just adding this to make it look like the grass or ground or underneath his feet. It just, again, added more color. One of my issues with the first project was there wasn't enough color. It was too bland. And so I started problem solving in my head. Here I used, the yellow, red oxide and the yellow, bigger stenciling, so it showed up, and then using the collage papers here, the coffee filter colored papers, and adding that green. This really is much brighter. And then I decided, for the sentiment of this one, I typed out a whole page. So I pick a bunch of sentiments, I go on Pinterest, I find what interests me, I type them up, different sizes, different fonts, and then I pick what works. And I thought, oh, we're going to give this gnome a little bit of attitude. I don't care at all. Whereas the other one, I went with the Easter theme tying in with the bunny rabbit. So just because it has bunny ears doesn't mean it is an Easter napkin. Use my Secure Glaze pen, outlining the sentiment just like I did with the first one. So a lot of the steps are the same, but you get two total different types of pages. So there we have with the napkin that I used, or the stencil I used and the napkin. So now it's your job. Go into the description box or the comment section and tell me which one do you like and why, or what do you like about each of them. Until next time, go get creative.